opportunity.
So, from military to financing, what made you think of real estate?
Yeah, so that's it's a great question. So especially so we go back to Utah. So after I was working at Discover Card, right? So doing a lot of telemarketing, right? Outbound calling all day, every day. After I left Discover Card, I ended up at this interesting job that in the interview they were like, "Hey, so what about the ad? Made you want to apply to this?" And I said, "To be honest, I have no idea. Everything you just told me about this, if I had read that in a thing, I probably wouldn't have applied." But it sounded pretty awesome. So it was actually a phone sales coaching job or a coaching sales job, but it wasn't for real estate in general. It was more of a financial health information. But on the back end of that, they would also help people start a business, and some of that was real estate. So that was my first kind of foray into the real estate investing side of stuff. And after working at that job for a while, I did actually go to a more dedicated real estate coaching sales floor, like post seminars and training or the books and tapes of old. I would do outreach and talk about different, opportunities and stuff. So that was my first kind of view into it. I was like, hey, this is kind of cool. I should look into this. At that point, I was maybe 21, 22. I was looking at a couple things and trying to figure some things out and do some things on my own. I did find a property and was trying to make some things work. As I mentioned, I was when I ran into that kid on recruiting duty, and I was working on some things. We were working on a $1 million house at the time, and it was sounded like an amazing deal, and was trying to raise capital and just kind of trying to figure some things out with one other guy that I knew it from one of the sales floors, and trying to make things work, and then just couldn't quite figure it out and make it work. And also, I mentioned that buddy that was in the that I knew out here. So he was in the Army Reserve, and one of our other friends was too, and so they had access to the GI Bill. So they bought a house, and we all moved into it and just went like room to room and fixed everything up. So I got to live there for free and just kind of swing a hammer, hang some drywall, do some plumbing stuff, and we all kind of figured out. So that was my first like taste of rehab and stuff too. Now I didn't get to join in any of the profits and stuff, but like I said, I was a 20-year-old kid, had a free
You
place
got a
to
place to
stay, and I
stay.
could do stuff with my hands that
Yeah.
really, I had some experience with, mostly from, family and, high school jobs, that kind of stuff to kind of build on and grow. And figured, definitely did some things wrong that we had to undo and fix and stuff along the way. But that was my first kind of foray into that. But then I joined the Marine Corps, and all of that kind of went to the side, and I just kind of hadn't thought about it, hadn't really touched on it. And then then I got out of the Marine Corps, moved to New York, went to finish college, met my wife, we got married, bought our first house, and we moved to a place called Port Washington on Long Island. Great town, and so anytime a friend of mine was thinking about moving out of the city, I was like, hey, you got to come to Port. You got to come to Port. And so then I started looking for houses for them.
Right.
And right before Christmas, so like December 2019, I saw a house come up, and it was, I now know it was a pre-approved short sale in town. Went there, toured it, and, I was like, hey, this is kind of the friend that I was looking for. It was too much work for him. But I was like, hey, as an investment, this could be a great opportunity. So through some negotiations, we finally came to terms on it, and we're in the process. We were half executed. So I paid my deposit. I had signed. We were waiting on the seller to sign, who was out of state in Michigan when like the whole lockdown thing happened in 2020.
Oh yeah, what a nightmare that
Um,
was, man.
yeah, and you know what? I started, so all of my cash to close was in the S&P, right? Because I was like, hey, I don't want to take the capital gains hit for the down payment on something if it's not going to happen. So it was just sitting there, and I was watching each day, boom, 5% down, 10% down. And then it was at the point that I was like, so I got spooked, and ended up canceling the contract. And for the longest time, when I told this story, I felt really good about it. I was like, hey, I made a good choice. I would have been stuck with it for an extended period of time. But I was always kept an eye on it. And, maybe a year and a half, 2 years later, somebody else had bought it, finished it, fixed it up, sold it for maybe 80,000 more than I thought I could. So
Right.
then I started doing the math. And I was like, wow, that actually would have been a smoking deal.
Yeah, there would have been a lot of
Uh,
holding costs though in that that time frame that you had, right?
yeah, yeah,
Because I'm
absolutely.
sure the taxes were up there, right?
Yeah. Taxes were up there. The carrying costs would have been pretty significant. But I think again, once I saw what it ended up selling for, even that a year and a half later, I think it more than and that guy had to pay more for it than I did,
Right.
right? And so all in all, it would have once it finally sold, I was like, wow, wait a minute, actually, maybe it's not what wasn't a great decision, but. Um,
Hey,
but yeah,
we
so that was
learn,
my
right? We live
yeah,
and we
exactly,
learn, and that's where we
exactly.
get the experience from. So, all that being said, what educational platforms did you take? Because you did mention to me the other day when we spoke briefly that you had taken a couple different ones, right?
Yeah. So that's funny. So I was actually when I was working on that deal, I started looking for financing, right? And so I went to a website and it was like, hey, if you're looking for hard money loans, where are you looking at? And you give it some details, and they say lenders will reach out to you. And boy, do they. And so so it was great. And so one company reached out and they were doing a what they called a funding tour, which was ended up being like a 2 day seminar, free seminar. Which again, going back to my phone sales today, I even told my wife before I went, and I said, I know they're going to try to offer me a package. Don't let me do it. You know,
Mm-hmm.
and so I went to that, and that's where I was right before the lockdown, right? So I was already half executed, trying to figure out, trying to find hard money, private money for that deal. And I was talking to some of the coaching program people there, and they were trying to hook me up with some of their seminars and trainings that they were doing. But also I was like, hey, I have this deal and let's run the numbers on it. And from the things they teach you in the national programs, 70% ARV minus repairs on that, it didn't really meet that metric. And so he's like, I probably wouldn't do that deal. And he said, I think the margins are too thin. Even if your numbers hold, I don't think it kind of works. And I said, okay. So and again, the world was, it was a unknown, a lot of unknowns,
Yeah, it
especially
was
with
a
your
very
first
big
deal.
gray area. you know?
Yeah, exactly. And the worst thing could have been is if I had closed on it and then I had to sit on it for 6 months with not being able to do anything to it, right? So so they gave me some sage advice at the time to, hey, you know what, just it probably is not going to work. So I got out of the deal, and then they were like, hey, but we've got we've got some virtual and live seminars. We can hook you up with a live coach, and all they come out to your town and they do this whole thing. And I was like, hey, that sounds great. So I signed up with one of their bigger packages then. But again, they were supposed to send somebody out, but then people couldn't travel.
Yeah.
And so I actually got an extended period of time of, weekly calls with this coach, and they were great. So I got to really spend a lot of time and learn a lot of stuff on like how to market, how to have conversations, how to look for things, how to use, at that point I wasn't a licensed agent, how to use Zillow to, look for recent sales and things like that. They kind of comp and value properties and try to start looking and sending out postcards, doing cold calling. It did early phases of texting at that point, and just kind of really getting that, kind of having leads in a CRM and kind of starting to work them. And again, I was getting close. I was having conversations. I got into building, social media marketing with some of the classes and stuff. But I was like, I was getting right to that finish line, and I was just hitting the wall. I think deals would fall apart for like the most, what I felt was like the most random reason.
Right.
And then but continuing to push, So again, that was like 2020. I started like March, April, started doing some of that. And the first deal didn't material. It didn't close on my first deal until October of 21. Not to jump around too much, but so it took about 18 months of just consistent, well, maybe not exactly consistent, but continued progress and work and effort to, get that first deal.
And you were probably a little bit more cautious on that deal, right?
Yeah, and again, so I did some national, trainings and stuff, and the biggest, probably the greatest advice
I mean,
that
you said
coach
you
gave
worked
me.
risk management for Bank of America, so obviously
Yeah,
you're strict to the numbers, and you're probably a
yeah,
little bit more cautious than most would be. when it comes to investing.
Correct. And I now know that some of those high level metrics don't exactly work for New York State, or
Right.
at least in Long Island, because
A lot
prices
of
are so
stuff does not
much bigger.
work. A lot of stuff does not work for for California or New York.
Yeah,
You know.
exactly. And so, but one of the great things that they told me to do was like, hey, you need to connect with local investors, and a great way to do that was for RIAs. And so I did a search, and at that point, everything was all on Zoom and virtual. And I connected both with, with a few RIAs, and one of them being the Long Island RIA,
Right.
and really started to figure out, hey, here's some nuances here, and here are some things where here's how to take what you learn, but you really just make some fine tweaks to finally start making some things happen and getting past those weird little hiccups at the end where I would either lose a deal because I was pushing for a contingency, right? Oh, I need a 14-day contingency, I need a finance contingency, I need all this, but hey, this is a lawyer state, and a good attorney isn't going to allow that to happen. And you gotta know your numbers and be willing to go into a contract and be with no way out, and have belief that it is a good deal and that you're going to be able to close on it, type of thing. But yeah, so those are like some of the weird little nuances that like don't work in New York that I had to learn from going to reach connecting with people with the local RIAs.
Right.
um,
And then you
yeah.
took our mentorship program, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I had, so I finally did my first deal, and I was continuing the RIAs and stuff, and trying to figure out, buying up houses, fixing up, sell them. That's a great model. But in the long term, I do want to have more, buy and holds. And so attending the Long Island RIAs and seeing what you guys were doing a lot of out of state investing, which for rentals, again, in Long Island, it's prices are so high, taxes are so high, it's very hard to make it work.
And
At that
the
point, you guys are
eviction
doing things.
process, the eviction
Oh,
process
and
is
yeah,
ridiculous.
yes. And so that was probably the biggest reason I got involved with Long Island RIA and your guys' coaching program, was to figure out, hey, one, how to value long-term buy and holds, right? And then also how to find and do deals out of state,
Right.
right? The first thing I went with you guys was one of the little day trips to Connecticut to look at listed properties, which again would not work in New York, or at least in Long Island.
Hmm.
But seeing what's available out there and how it can work from a long term buy and hold strategy. So I was just getting ready to pull a trigger on something like that, and then boom, a three family rental popped into my lap, that had some hair on it here in locally. So I was able to take that information and knowledge and the model, and see, hey, I can, the numbers are phenomenal on this. And then I just happened to be local to where I could self manage at first, and 2 years later still am, and kind of work through and figure out some of the nuances on it.
Right.
Um,
So
and
wait,
since then I now have two other rentals. Oh, go ahead.
before you took the program, how many rentals did you have?
How many what?
How many rentals did you have before the program?
I had zero.
And how many do you have now?
So I have two right now. I've got that three family I just mentioned, here in Long Island, and then a 12 unit apartment building in upstate New York.
And from what I also know, you diversify, right? So you also have an Airbnb.
Yes. So I have an Airbnb in Parker, Arizona. So if we think back to, why I didn't play high school football, that's where I was going. So a complete selfish, well, that's why I was looking in that area. We're actually going, I'm taking my family there the first time, actually on Monday. So I'm really looking forward to that. And then I have another one under contract in Massachusetts that we're going through the zoning variance process right now to be able to have it, 8 units in that building. So we'll see how that pans out. So, looking to continue to grow and expand, both in the buy and hold, and then the fix and flip side.
And you also do wholesaling, right?
Mostly just rehabbing. I haven't actually my most recent. So on right after, so about 3 weeks ago, I closed on my first direct to seller deal. And there was enough of a margin there that I could have wholesaled it. I did send it out, got some decent offers on it, but being my first direct to seller deal, I wanted to take it down and see it to fruition, myself. And at least from a rehab standpoint, they tend to not the crews I have working with today, they don't take too long. So an additional 4 or 5 weeks to get the higher return is